O God of new things, new perspectives, new life in the wilderness, help us to see and know and learn your ways that we might follow your paths in the wasteland. Yesterday, I was listening to the TED Radio Hour on NPR. Maybe you caught the program too. The episode was called How You See Yourself. One of the guests was a social psychologist named Dolly Chugg. And she talked about how all of us want to be seen and thought of as a good person. And she said, this desire to be seen as good actually prevents us from being just that, good. In order to be a good person, one needs to be able to recognize when we're not. Because then, when we're not, when we make a mistake, we can learn from it. But this desire to be seen as good has the opposite effect. It makes us defensive and thus unable to see our shortcomings and learn from them. We're blinded by that desire. So I have an example from my own life. Spoiler alert, it makes me look good, of course, because I'm not going to purposely make myself look bad, right? Anyway, I was in class in seminary, and in my sharing, I used the word gyp. Afterwards, I feel gypped about something. Afterwards, a classmate approached me and said, I know you're the type of person who would want to know this. Gyp is disparaging because it's a slur referring to gypsies. She was right. I didn't know and would want to know. And I've never used that word again, except to tell this story. And I thanked her for telling me. Now, she approached me so kindly, it was easy to hear and learn from her correction, but still, I could have gotten defensive. I could have said, well, I didn't mean it that way. I'm sorry you heard it that way. And if I had, that would have been my desire to be seen as good getting in the way of my actually becoming good, a better person. In today's gospel, the scribes and the Pharisees are feeling defensive. More than defensive, they are threatened because their position in the community as leaders and models of goodness is being threatened by Jesus. The gospel says all the people started coming to him. Jesus had been healing and teaching and growing quite a following, and people were turning to him as their moral, ethical, scriptural, and religious leader. So the scribes and Pharisees became defensive, and they came up with a plan to get Jesus out of the picture so that they could restore their standing as the go-to good ones. Their desire to be seen as good got in the way of their actual goodness. So some background from one of my favorite biblical scholars, Amy Jill Levine. She says that in the first century of Israel, neither women nor men were being stoned for adultery. The Jewish faith throughout, since the beginning, is got a pretty well-established tendency to change and learn based on scripture, tradition, and prayer. It was an accepted thing and it was practiced. So this sentencing to stoning was already old by the first century. It was no longer practiced. So the whole scheme was cooked up so that they could confront him, which they did. It's telling and moving that Jesus had begun the day in prayer on the Mount of Olives. And then he arrived in the temple, a place of prayer. And then he began to teach based on his knowledge of Scripture and his time in prayer. Then when he was confronted, he bent down in prayer. He paused. Perhaps he was recalling God's words in Isaiah when God said, I'm about to do a new thing. It will spring forth and you shall know it. But he paused in prayer, and afterwards he straightened up. He had discerned something true and human, and that is that we all sin. We all make mistakes, and the best way to be good is to shed our desire to be seen as good, and rather to admit our mistakes, ask God for help, and make amends. St. Paul says all those old, worn-out ways of doing things are just rubbish. Start over. Keep your eyes on the prize. Be the good. The psalmist sings that those who sow in tears shall reap in rejoicing. Those who weep shall come back rejoicing. We in this community, sinners all, good people all, we are grounded in enough prayer and community and love that we have the opportunity to shed our desire to be seen as good, and so learn from our mistakes and be the good. Let us open our eyes to see. Let us open our ears to hear. Let us examine our ways with enough humility and courage to change them. We are filled with joy.